Hi, welcome back to 30 Days of Going Inside because we can't go outside. And today is day 26, Contain. We've looked, haven't we, over the last few days and weeks at the ways in which our mind can hook us with certain thoughts. And we sometimes have thoughts like, I am stupid, or I am clever. And the reality is that whilst we are sometimes those things, we're also not those things quite a lot of the time. So sometimes I am thick and I'm not thick. And yet we get hooked by the I am statements as though they're true. And these can have a huge impact on how we behave and how we feel. So today we're going to be exploring this idea that whilst we are sometimes these thoughts, we're also not these thoughts. We're so much more than all of these thoughts. And we are in fact a container for these thoughts. So I'm all of these things. And I'm none of these things. I'm actually something so much more than those things. And we call this sense of self, this sort of transcendent sense of self, this self as container.
It's interesting when you talk about stories and when we get hooked on them, that can really restrict our behaviour. And as you said, the reality is these different stories can be helpful and unhelpful in different contexts. But these stories are not us. So in our families, there are two stories that have been around for a long time about you and about me. So the story about me is that I'm highly sociable, but I'm thick. And the story about you is that you're highly gifted and moody.
And if I were a documentary filmmaker and I was invited to make a documentary about Rachel, the not very bright but really sociable and really popular sister, then I could follow you around for a few months and I could show lots of evidence to support that. I could go back through the years and perhaps gather evidence historically, and I could make this great film that would show how wonderfully sociable and popular Rachel is, and she's not quite so clever. Similarly, if somebody else invited me, though, to make a documentary about Rachel, showing how she's actually quite happy with her own company and incredibly intelligent, I could go and look historically to find evidence to support that. And I could also follow you around at the moment for a few months and find lots of evidence to support that. So then I've got two documentary films, one supporting one story about Rachel and one supporting another story. And so the question is, which one of those is Rachel?
I'm both of those stories and I'm neither of those stories. And what's interesting is that we both know that those stories are not the entire picture, and yet we often carry the burden of those stories. And that's where metaphors can really help us to shift perspective and to access a different sense of self. So maybe we could share our favourite metaphor for this, Lou.
The sky and the weather. Just rest for a moment and see if you can imagine the sky. And we're going to explore how this part of you that is the noticer, the container, the observer, this part of you is like the sky. So the sky is vast and never-ending, and it's always there. And these thoughts and these feelings that show up are like the weather. And just notice that the weather is always changing, always moving. And sometimes the weather is so bad and so powerful that it completely obscures the sky. And we can't see it. But it's always there. Just notice how there is always room for the weather in the sky. And even when there's the most powerful blizzard or thunderstorm or hurricane, the sky is never damaged. And the weather always moves on. And notice as well How sometimes we might forget that the sky is there when we can't see it. And when we can't see the sky, when it's obscured by the clouds, just know that we can always rise above the clouds, that somewhere, no matter how bad the weather is, we can find the sky. And just notice that this observer you, this you that is you, is like the sky. And see if you can rest for a moment with this sense that there's a part of you that is a safe space, where you can observe and make room for all these thoughts and feelings that show up. And this part of you is like the sky.
So we're inviting you to do the Sky the Weather practice using the audio just there, or you can find similar practices on the internet, on YouTube. And also just taking a moment to perhaps notice the stories about you that show up, other stories that you've learned during your life that may be more or less helpful in different situations, but just perhaps noticing when these stories show up and what you do next, and seeing if you can unhook from the ones that feel a bit less helpful. Just like noticing that there's that story and I'm not that story. I'm something so much more.
Thanks ever so much, Lou. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow, which is day 27, which is replenish, which is where we're going to be looking at the subject of sleep and restorative sleep. So look forward to seeing you then.
Okay, see you then. Bye.